Morning, everyone. Welcome to VUS Tesol Webinars 2020. My name is Quirk and I'll be your host today. Before we start, can I check if all of you can hear me well? If yes, please type yes in the chat box. Okay, thank you. This free webinar series is held by VUS with the participation of ALT experts and invited speakers from well-known publishing houses, such as Oxford University Press, Macmillan Education, Cambridge Assessment English, and National Geographic Learning. We hope to bring you the most updated and practical teaching methods and techniques so that you can teach your class more effectively. So thank you for joining us in today's webinar, Managing Interaction and Feedback in the Virtual Classroom, presented by Ms. Simona Petrescu from Cambridge Assessment English. Before we start, please be informed that we will have the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Also, during that time, I'll send you the links for you to complete a survey about this webinar and to download your certificate of participation. And now let me introduce to you Ms. Simona Petrescu. Now over to you, Simona.
Thank you very much, Quirk. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Simona Petrescu. I work for Cambridge Assessment English, and I'm based in Germany, in Europe, where it's actually morning. So I had to remember to say good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, so good afternoon. Thank you for your greetings in the chat. Yes, so I'm going to talk to you today about managing interaction and feedback in the context where we are teaching increasingly online. Even if I understand at the moment you are already getting back to school, the situation is very similar to Europe and to Germany, but we think that an increasingly blended model of teaching and learning will become the model of the future, or at least for the following months, if not really for the longer term. I'd like you to use the chat box during the webinar to just drop any comments that you have, or if you have any technical issues. But if you have questions that you would like us to answer at the end, please put them in the Q&A box. In this way, the questions are saved and we can get back to you. So we will have a short Q&A session at the end where it will be much easier to go through your questions in the Q&A box than in the chat. We hope to have time to answer all of your questions there. So please remember the questions that you'd like to be answered about the content of this webinar, put them in the Q&A box. I understand that there will be a recording of this session, so you will be able to see and to watch it again and again. So yeah, let's get started. First of all, here are the main points that I'm going to cover. We're first looking today at the changes that are taking place in our teaching practices due to this unexpected situation. And we're going to take a brief look at what may only partly be really a new situation or a new paradigm in order to understand how we can move on. We're then going to look at typical interaction patterns, including feedback, both within and outside the online lesson itself. We'll conclude with a few general aspects that we need to bear in mind throughout our online courses, whether they are really together with the students at the same time in a virtual meeting or outside of a meeting. And part of that final section of my talk today will go to, or will be dedicated to, feedback on writing, because this may be the most pen and paper activity we are used to as teachers. And there we might still have difficulties in this transition to an online environment. And at the very end, we will have a very brief view of what other useful resources you can access, both on the topic today, managing interaction and feedback, but also on other topics related to online teaching and learning. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, a brief look at the current situation and what this may mean for us teachers. And here is a statement that would like you to reflect for a minute on. And I'm going to start a poll. Please take a minute to answer whether you think you agree or you disagree. There's a great deal more learning taking place informally online than in our classrooms. So I can see responses coming in very quickly. I'm still okay, so it seems we still have some of you waiting for some of your answers. It seems we've got a majority at the moment agreeing with the statement. Okay, so I'm going to stop the poll now and share the results for you to see. So about 70% of you agree. So there seems to be a great deal more learning actually taking place outside of our classrooms, is what most of you think. Thank you very much. Actually, here's a fact. So there are 500 million views of not just any content on YouTube, but of learning related content on YouTube every single day. This figure is incredible, isn't it? It speaks volumes about the hunger for learning that exists and manifests itself online. And we need to take our challenge these weeks, these months with optimism. Because our learners are already quite familiar and are well into online learning. Of course, that learning may be taking place with little, with maybe inappropriate or no interaction at all. But that is exactly where our role as teachers comes in. Learning is, as we know, greatly shaped by the experience it brings along, not only by the content itself. So I'd like you to have a look at these two pictures illustrating two very different learning experiences. And if you could compare these two pictures, are there any differences between what types of things people you think are learning in each situation? Please use the chat to write down some of your ideas quickly in keywords. I'm going to move the camera a bit. Okay. So doing is learning face to face. Yes. Group work. So what do you think? Interaction. Okay. Interaction and environment. The tools used. Okay. So what do you think they're learning in one situation contrasted to the other learning situation? Or group work, learning online. Okay. Collaboration. Thank you. Yes. Good communication skills. So communicative skills versus keyboard shortcuts. Okay, interaction group. Okay, thank you very much. That's right. You might also, so some of the ideas coming in are also related to collaboration and maybe scaffolding and practice and social interaction. The close relation between teacher and students, feedback being given directly, physical presence, connection, and so on. Yeah, well then, based on this distinction, connected to those two pictures, this is probably a statement that you might be, or a conclusion that you might be drawing from the contrast of those two pictures. I'm going to start a new poll, and please tell us if you think you agree, if you think that learning online is indeed mainly cognitive, so that teaching online is mainly about passing on information. Okay, so the views seem to be more balanced this time. There is a majority, but not so clear, or not so clearly delimited from the other half of your opinions. We've got a quite balanced mix here. Okay. Okay, so I'll end the poll now to share the results. So we've got a 55-45% balance of opinions. It's nice to see that so many of you disagree with this. I think there is a clear danger that learning and teaching online might become just that, only about passing on information. This is what learning and teaching online might end up looking indeed, when teachers are not supported, when teachers are overwhelmed, when teachers are not familiar with the features or the tools that are available, or when they haven't seen examples of online teaching. So I'm glad that quite a few of you, actually the majority, 55%, think this is not really true. So that's a good starting point. Okay. Because I wanted to stress that, in fact, the question on, or the statement on the slide before, would be very hard to reconcile with these online phenomena, the human factor that is still present online, like, for example, Facebook groups or social media groups and communities. They hardly exist just to exchange information, or mainly to exchange information. They exist in order to create a sense of belonging, of sharing passions and interests. And members use groups to share instant posts about feelings and likes and dislikes and attitudes. And the emoticons you can see at the bottom of the slide are sometimes even overused in such groups and communities and in online communication in general. And then we all know the well-known photos of pets on social media. and all the other very personal pictures of, oneself boasting a great achievement, like a great holiday, celebrating an anniversary, showing off a family member or a friend. And all these photos are hardly about passing on information, but they're about sharing feelings. And the same goes for our use of instant messaging, where our language and conventions are quite casual. And we don't use instant messaging necessarily to exchange information, but to reassure each other that we're okay. So to stay in touch on a very personal level. And then there are, of course, many offers or many products offered online, which in those advertisements and the products themselves are not so much about information, but about well-being, about balance and a better standard of life. So there's overall quite a strong human factor online as well. And even here, I found a nice advert on my Facebook wall. Um, Take a look how many shares and how many comments were underneath this advert, and most of them were not made in order to share product specifications or just information, but to express feelings or to be helpful towards a friend we think would love this product. So I'm just showing you here a range of comments. You can see how personal they are. Just got mine and love it. I especially love the face option. Or even more personal, would like to purchase this for my son. So it's getting even intimate about family. Or I want one, or wow, I want this. So we do interact online, and there is quite a strong emotional factor and human factor online. And there is, or we do have the choices, the options available to create rapport online, so that learning and teaching don't have to be dry, don't have to be just about passing on information. So in fact, the question then is really how we can embed this rapport and interaction and feedback, and not whether. So it's not a matter of yes or no, but really how to do that in our online courses. And actually, if we think and if we remember, remember it's recent past, but it feels already like it was ages ago that we were debating about the flipped classroom. Well, actually now this current situation might be the chance, the opportunity for us to truly start flipping the classroom, where we are forced to move a lot of our teaching activities online. But of course, this cannot happen by just copy pasting what we do in the physical classroom, putting it online. Some rethings are needed, however. And first of all, one of them, probably I think the most fundamental is we won't be able to fully replicate online the amount of time we spend with our students simultaneously. So synchronous, you might already be familiar with these terms, synchronous and asynchronous, because they've been used quite a lot lately. So we need to think back of our real classroom as simply environments for our work with the students. And in that environment, the real classroom, there were many times when students were doing things on their own, such as mentally process the input we were giving them in the form of a text or an audio or a video. And the flipped classroom concept already made us aware that we could, in fact, maximize the teacher and student together time, this synchronous teaching time, by focusing the classroom time on the teacher-student interaction. Now, due to this virtual environment being more fluid, and partly due to the fact that we are getting tired much sooner by sitting too long in a virtual meeting, we need to start seeing our courses and our teaching as a blended experience made up of coming together, also called synchronous teaching or instruction, and of teaching and learning taking place individually, called asynchronous instruction. Classroom-based education so far created the perception that education takes place in the classroom through the teacher's teaching. And okay, there also used to be homework before, but it tended to be considered something extra, and in some situations or cultures, even optional. But in an online environment, we need to design our courses as a blend of activities that we do together at the same time with our students, and individual work that has to be done in between these meetings. So after all, you know that an old pedagogical tenet says that learning doesn't equal teaching, which also means then that our course doesn't have to be limited to the synchronous event. Instead, learning can be distributed among the three stages: before, during, and after the class or the meeting. So more practically, if you're expected to teach a group 2 hours a week, it doesn't mean that you would now need to sit with your students for 2 hours in front of your screens. It means rather that you would need to design your students' learner experience as a mix of interactions stretching over 2 hours, which would be distributed across the actual interaction with your students, its preparation, and its follow-up. This has several advantages when we consider, for example, the fact that your students may come to your lesson straight after another one. And online classes, as I said, can be quite tiring. So it's hard for them to keep focused on the screen for too long. And also, asynchronous learning allows learners to work at times that suits them, in ways that suit them, especially if you think that they might have to share a device with somebody at home. The other thing, it's becoming imperative to set out from a basic premise of trust. We cannot control our learners' actions, and we cannot control their attention. And we were never quite capable of that. Let's accept it. What we can do, however, is do our best to engage them and keep them in the loop. Placing trust in their willingness to cooperate, which starts really from just logging in, and giving them equal ways to contribute ideas, will create ultimately a sense of empowerment. As our virtual courses or online courses might become less and less about correcting behavior, but will include all participants on an equal footing. On the other hand, technical settings will be available to you to prevent disruptive behavior from taking over the lesson. For example, you decide on the permissions you give students during the lesson to use their mic, camera, or share their screen. Also, on most platforms, you can decide which participant to remove, or not allowing private conversations on the platform. Finally, the way we plan and prepare our lessons will become just as important as the content of what we're teaching. We need to think in advance at the level of the whole course, how to split the learning activities between synchronous and asynchronous modes, what resources to use and how to collect them and then share them with our students. At the level of each lesson, we need to have the documents prepared and follow a clear plan so as to manage time properly. Of course, all this was important for teaching in general, even in the real classroom. But if our course is being run online, all the solutions we come up with to these questions will constitute a so-called user or learner experience, which will be made up of things like, for example, how easy is it for learners to find the resources for the following class or for the past lessons? How smoothly do the activities follow on from each other during the virtual meeting? How varied are the activities both during and between the meetings? How compact or spread out are the resources, files, feedback, projects, and so on? And do all these resources build up a track record of the learning that has taken place? So one final point, if we don't want online teaching to be only about passing on information or content, as that statement said at the beginning of our webinar, we need to be careful how we design this learner experience. Online learning will be reduced to content if we simply post content for students to work through on their own. The major message here is that we cannot transfer only the content from the real classroom to the virtual one, but we also need to recreate the learner experience that it was so easy to model when face-to-face. And this online learner experience will need as much, if not even more, of the human factor in order to build bridges across, electronic devices. Some of the advantages that in fact technology will provide for our teaching are here on this slide. So differentiation, if you think of teaching online, you are probably better off doing shorter sessions with smaller groups. So that helps you, in fact, differentiate and dealing with mixed levels. Collaboration becomes more palpable if you think of getting students to do project work on a collaborative document, such as a Padlet, for example. If you are supposed to provide ongoing evaluation, that is becoming more feasible and easier to do, because all these online resources will create a track record of what your students have actually been doing the whole term. You will have, due to the technicalities that you have available, you will have more options to provide feedback in a way that may become not just more diverse, but maybe also more personal, such as, for example, recording your voice giving feedback instead of just marking a text with a red pen. Because everyone is joining from a device, the old distinction in the class between students who are more confident or more extroverted versus those that are less extroverted and less confident, this contrast will disappear, because you will have the ability, the option of getting contributions from all your learners, no matter their temperament or their personal characteristics. And finally, this is really the chance for us to design realistic communicative tasks, because finally the classroom has to move to become in line, or to be in line with a digital age reality. So designing more realistic communicative tasks, such as posting in a forum or writing a blog post, is becoming easier. So I'm going to start a new poll, because I'd like you to think of these advantages, and think of the one advantage that you think you have been most often or best able to experience in your teaching. which of these advantages of technology in your own teaching experience have you noticed? This is a sort of reflection for you. Realistic communication tasks seems to be a strong answer. Feedback becoming more effective. It's interesting that most of you are saying realistic communication tasks, whereas at the beginning the statement was about online teaching is just about passing on information. So you see, it's great to see that in fact so many of you are experiencing this or are enjoying this extra option or this advantage. I'll leave it for a couple of more seconds. Okay, so here are the results. So it seems that most of you have chosen realistic communication tasks and then equal opportunities for learners and feedback more effective on the same rank. That's very nice. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. Right. So it seems then that there's nothing very, very new. We're not stepping into really a new teaching paradigm. We only need to remember the good old pedagogical guidelines, if we can call them like that, and to remember the flipped classroom. And then just map them or translate them, map them onto the possibilities that the technology gives us. So it is a new situation, but it's not exactly a new paradigm that we are faced with. We can, and we are called, in fact, to take what we already know so well in order to teach effectively and simply transfer all this to teaching online. And how can we do it? Flipping the course, if you remember, was precisely about splitting activities between inside and outside the class. So here inside the class will be in the online class, of course. So you can think of your online teaching as an alternate model. Before the class, maybe you can send your students what they need to the input, the new content that they need to read and understand, or you may send them something as a lead-in, so that during the online meeting you can focus on collecting feedback and queries from them and discussing what was not clear, or simply discussing how they feel about the subject, doing an activity maybe to practice and consolidate. And then after the class, there is follow-up extending what you have been doing during the lesson. And then a new cycle starts again before the class, and it goes on. So this means that now this online environment is more easily divided between together times and times for individual work. And this division was not so clear in the real classroom, because our education systems makes it compulsory for students to sit in the classroom. But as I said, not everything we did in the classroom was about interaction. And now moving everything online, it's probably best to focus in the online meetings on specifically the interaction that is very important to maximize that time of teacher being together with students. So thinking of the interaction that I showed you on a previous slide that is available online, this is a brief overview of types of online interaction. So we can interact using comments or voting or using emoticons. We can collaborate in real time on documents, or we can use web conferencing tools and tools to share, like online libraries. So a web conferencing tool is exactly what we're using right now, Zoom. So how can we possibly use it in our teaching? Well, we could use a mix of the elements shown here. Of course, regarding blogs or forums or platforms, you can have public tools or school-owned versions of these that might be more suitable for different contexts, especially if you think of primary students or secondary school students, lower or higher levels of English, and so on. Right. And of course, coming to this point, I need to make this point very, very clear, because it's been made time and time again, and these online webinars about online teaching, but it's never enough. We need to be careful about online safety. We need to consider what data is being stored in what conditions, whether our students' learning space is potentially exposed to intruders. We need to check that the platform works in compliance with the school's privacy or safety and data policies. Asking yourselves the questions: who can access student data? Who can get into the class, into the virtual meeting? It's best to keep the link to the lessons private, not sharing it on the social media. Lesson information and links should be shared through the school system or by email, or use a platform that requires students to log in with a password. And then who can see and share video during a meeting? And also, can you monitor all the conversations that are going on the platform? For example, you can change the settings so that students cannot have private chat on the platform in your lessons. And the link below is a link to an article that we have on our digital teacher platform about how to manage the digital footprints, how much information we leave online about ourselves. And this lesson is a lesson plan that encourages you to discuss with your students what information they would want to stay available online for a future employer or a future educational institution and so on to access. Okay, but yes, moving on to interaction before the lesson. Let's take a look what can be done before a lesson. So in a flipped classroom model, especially required right now, we will need to send or share resources with our students, which they can read before the class. For this purpose, you may use a variety of options. You may share the resources in a virtual learning environment, such as the school LMS. Or if your school doesn't have an LMS, you could design your virtual classroom on platforms such as Edmodo or Schoology. There are plenty of them. But if you just want to take the simplest option, of course, you may simply email your material to the students. Now, as for the material itself, you can record yourself explaining the main facts of the new unit. But then, yes, it's important to keep it short. And you can use many options like PowerPoint with voice recording, and you can upload or email it as a PowerPoint show, or even convert it as a video. You can use screencasting tools, that is recording your screen if you want to show something on your computer screen, and your voice explaining what you're doing while showing that content, and you save this as a video. You can simply record your voice and send it together with a Word document. This is really the simplest option. Of course, you can also think of sending already or ready-made files, for example, links to one or two texts online, or screenshots of such things online pasted in one document. Along with the learning resources, it's nice, it's good, it's recommendable if you could also start a discussion eliciting comments from students on the materials that they have read. Such a discussion can be set up in your school's LMS as a forum under that unit, or in that unit. Or you can create it externally on Padlet, let's say, or on a Google document. So you're collecting impressions and comments from your students on what they have read. So here's an example. You have found this task. It's a writing task. You would like to do this writing task with your students. This particular task might be most suitable for B1 level learners aged between 12 and 15-year-old. Okay. Now, you might be wondering, okay, I want my students to write this article. What can I do before we meet online? Well, as a pre-lesson material, you can email or upload a short list of vocabulary to talk about what they like doing. You could include even items like cartoons, memes, comics, funny videos of pets, and so on, along with the patterns: I enjoy, ing, I like, or I find something, and an adjective. So you can send language that you would normally pre-teach, maybe. You send it before the lesson. And after they have a look at this material, they would need to get involved in a short interaction. You would start a discussion activity, as I said. Also, to make sure that you know that they accessed the pre-lesson material. And also, of course, for you to watch their engagement. Starting this interaction before the lesson means that you can begin to engage students before the class time even starts. And it also means that students will already be thinking about the topic and know what's coming in their class. And this can be motivating and help weaker students to prepare a little more. Excuse me a second. Oops, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so you can start a discussion by launching the question, what makes you laugh? And students have to post an answer by using the language they got in the first document. And this gives you some idea who read that useful language document, and links the resource, the document, the language reference document, to a communicative activity. And you can also include with the question a funny photo, like what I have tried to do here on the slide, which students can react to, or you can, in this way, encourage students to post their reactions. And of course, before you actually start your lesson, you will need to follow what has been posted. monitoring, of course, use of English, good behavior when posting comments, and so on. Of course, if you don't have the option, you don't have an LMS in the school, or the LMS doesn't provide the option of having a forum or group discussions, you can simply use external tools such as a Facebook group or groups on instant messaging tools such as WhatsApp. Of course, such groups will need to be set as private, and you need to control who can join or access them. If you're working with children under 18, of course, we recommend that you check your institution's e-safety policy before using any online digital tools. And again, there's a link there on that slide to the digital teacher platform. I will maybe I will post the link in the chat to the digital teacher platform. In there you can find specifically a lesson showing you how to use instant messaging in activities in your teaching. Such tools make it easy to share pre-lesson documents even if you have no LMS. And you can also very easily collect students' reactions and comments to them. Of course, some of you might wonder, what if students don't do the pre-lesson activities? That's a very good question. And there are several answers here. First of all, this can happen. The question is really, is it a singular case or does it tend to be the rule? In other words, is it a normal case of not making it, or does it have to do with motivation? Because if it's a singular case, then we don't need to worry about it. We can simply ignore it. If motivation is a problem, then we need to think about several aspects. Could it be that we simply assigned tasks without explaining why they're important for the online class to work well? Did we maybe assign too much to do, assuming that the students will just need to do it? Is the pre-lesson task communicative enough and reasonably fun to do? For example, do we send a long text and do they just need to read the text for its own sake? We could instead introduce the text with a short, maybe a bit humorous summary of our own. Maybe we can link the text with a communicative task, such as I have suggested, an exchange with their colleagues in a way that's suitable for their age and interests. You can simply ask them to share impressions or to relate the content of the text to themselves. For example, what makes me laugh, and so on. Or simply, it may simply be a matter of formulating your instructions in a nice, friendly way, and if possible, choose a nice photo to add a little bit of liveliness and color to the task you are assigning. Of course, if none of this works for the occasional case or learner, we'll need to be very clear on the rules. For example, are they aware that the ongoing evaluation will consider the level of engagement unit by unit, task by task? Are they aware that the old context where physical attendance in the class was obligatory, this is no longer sufficient for our evaluation? In the new context of maybe an increasingly blended model, they are empowered to make their own choices. For example, just logging in or not, attending the meeting or not. But they also need to know the consequences. And if they decide not to log in or not to engage, we will have no other way of evaluating their performance positively. So it's basically a matter of communicating all this to our students. But the most of the interaction we can think of will take place, of course, during the lesson, as we're going to see. Typical interaction tools are listed here, and you're probably already quite familiar with them. The audio and video functions, the chat function, sharing your screen, and if available, these are dependent on the platform you're using, a whiteboard function and breakout rooms. And I'm going to very briefly look at them one by one. So audio and video are, of course, also a matter of your internet speed. It's okay just to use audio if video is not always possible. And you don't need to use both or either of them for the entire lesson. For example, when students do interact with each other, you can stop your microphone and your camera as well. So they don't have to be used for the entire lesson. Screen share. So sharing the screen is probably the most common functionality that we use as teachers to show documents and slides like I'm doing right now, but also to show collaborative documents as they are being updated in real time. You can show videos or images online, your browser window, and anything really you want. A virtual whiteboard is quite useful. It's the equivalent of a normal board in your real classroom, plus it has the extra options of pasting in images or text that you take from somewhere else, annotating, so making all sorts of marks and arrows and boxes, and highlighting with color. You can draw, you can erase, undo, and then at the end, this will you will be able to save this for future reference on this whiteboard. You can collect not just what you have written, but also what your students have produced during the lesson, and this can be then saved, which normally you cannot do in the real classroom with your normal board. Of course, the chat is again very useful. So you can use a group chat to encourage students to initiate and comment on each other's work, to ask questions. You may use it to elicit answers from them. You may use it to display errors and make corrections. You can even use it the way, if you think of how we started our webinar today, at the very beginning of the lesson, communicate about technical issues. And it's probably most important to use as a multi-way interaction channel between yourself, the group, and among the students during the lesson. Also now, breakout rooms, if they are available, offered by the platform you use, you can use them to set up pair work and group work and practice activities in smaller groups, typically for speaking, but even as lead in to writing, for example, or for group planning in some cases. And you have, of course, access to these breakout rooms so that you can monitor what is going on there and how each user is doing. Now, I'm going to start another poll because I'd like to hear from you which of these functionalities you would like to be able to use more often from these four. So sharing the screen, seems to be your favorite. This is, of course, very useful. And the whiteboard and the breakout rooms seem to be the runner-ups. Okay. Yeah, I think the screen sharing option is really fantastic, and it's so easy to use for whatever you want to do in your lesson. Okay. Please don't forget to drop any questions in the Q&A box, because otherwise there is no way for me to go back to answer them. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll share the results. It seems that sharing your screen is your favorite, but all the other three are equally useful and important to you. Thank you. Okay. Now coming back here, looking a bit at the types of interaction. We've looked at the tools. Now let's look at the types of interaction during the lesson. First, there is a specific type of interaction at the beginning of the lesson, as you probably noticed at the beginning of this webinar, in an online environment at least. While waiting for everyone to join, you can make small talk, have a cup of tea like I have here, welcome the student, check if they can hear and see you or see your slides or whatever you're sharing. If your platform allows you to see your students, ask them to also, wave and check that everything is working. You can do a short warm-up exercise, which doesn't have to be related to the lesson, just to help everyone focus on their screens. We need to remember that the students might be joining after other sessions and might be tired, or if they're joining from home, it might be good to do a short transition activity that helps them detach from the surroundings of their bedroom or living room or family members walking about the house, and just focus on your lesson. So you could do physical exercises. For example, ask them to get up and spin clockwise 3 times and then switch direction, do it the other way around. Or ask them what they had for breakfast or for lunch. Ask them to show in the camera what personal object they have next to themselves and to say a few words about it, if, let's say, if it's a teddy bear or so. And of course, it's very important to have the right materials at hand so that you can easily and smoothly initiate them, share them during the lesson at the right moment. Then you may want to set the main rules for interacting, at least at this point. You can decide to let the students use their microphones or cameras for a specific activity later on. The safest conditions, of course, are for students to be able to interact with you or with the whole group only via chat, to prevent unwanted interaction disrupting your lesson. But as I said, you will be able to change these settings and to grant more permissions for specific activities at specific moments during your lesson. One thing that you may need to do in your lesson is to go back to the pre-lesson resources and check what students think, invite their comments and queries. If they posted such feedback before the lesson, go through the posts quickly and discuss them. You can use for these both audio and video at this stage, as I posted on the slide, the symbols. If the group is small, you can also decide to let them interact with you live, so talk to you live by switching on their microphones or cameras. You can simply use the chat. The symbol for chat I use there is the keyboard. And if you want to record ideas to be saved, then use the whiteboard function, which I symbolize there with that green screen. And in any case, when you start the lesson, just acknowledge all students' contributions and focus on what they've written and not the accuracy, because the aim of these activities is to engage and encourage interaction, not to monitor necessarily the accuracy of the language. Of course, you might also, especially at the beginning of the lesson, use external polling tools. For example, Mentimeter is a nice one, is one of my favorites, because Mentimeter also allows you to generate a word cloud based on the responses, and you can use this word cloud for further discussion. Of course, the central interaction during your lesson probably takes place around the practice task or tasks that represent the main goal of the lesson. You typically need to share your screen to show it and to say or read out the instructions that are printed on the task. Here, you might expect students to respond by contributing ideas on the whiteboard, for example, making sentences using the focus language elements, or to discuss together in small groups or in pairs in breakout rooms. If such breakout rooms are not available, you will simply use the chat. Now, if appropriate, you may ask students to respond by sharing their work through their camera, for example, posting a short text, 1 or 2 sentences, or a photo, or whatever. Or you may even, if you think that is okay, you may even ask them to share their own screens if you're confident that they will use this option properly. And as I said, you can give them such permissions at this stage of the lesson only. For example, if you remember the writing task I showed before related to what makes us laugh, this might be a worksheet to share on your screen and ask them to practice expanding on their initial answers that they provided before the lesson by using linking words such as but or for example. So this is a material you could show on the screen, including the prompt for a speaking activity, and your students could practice in a breakout room. You can let the system pair up the students automatically, or you may do that yourself. If you don't have a whiteboard, an alternative to a whiteboard might be to create a Google document before the lesson in advance, and sharing it by, via link with the students before starting the activity. You can share the Google document then from your screen to the whole group, while students open a second browser window, access the Google document, enter their contributions, and then get back to the meeting room. Now, if your Google Doc is shared from your screen, as you can see it here on my slide, everyone will be able to see the contributions being added in real time. A very important part of the interaction around the practice task is, of course, your own feedback. As you would do in the regular classroom, you need to monitor students' answers and provide feedback, either encouraging their ideas or highlighting errors if they're significant to your lesson aims. And of course, there are several ways of monitoring and giving feedback, as you can see, and as normal, individually, in the chat by selecting the user, in the group, for example, in the breakout room, or as a whole group orally, or again, in the group chat. And then you can bring the class back together and address one of the language difficulties you identified in the groups. For example, you might have noticed that there were errors regarding prepositions. So after you bring the class back together from the breakout rooms, address this issue, for example, by writing on the whiteboard the question, where do you find or see or watch, so on, and eliciting answers from the students highlighting the correct preposition. After concluding a first activity, you may still have time for a second one. For example, in this lesson about what makes us laugh, you can show a sample article and elicit comments from them. Is this a good article in response to the task? Why? And this is probably easiest to use the chat function for, but you may also decide to unmute the students in order to answer and discuss the text more freely. But what is important if you're doing a second activity is to choose a different interaction pattern this time. So if your first activity puts students in groups or pairs, do this one as a whole group, and of course the other way around. And of course, you can also ask them what they think would make a good article and collect their responses either in the chat or on the whiteboard or with an external polling tool like Mentimeter. Concluding the lesson is also important to review what was learned or what was improved, announcing the follow-up task, also specifying how the students will get it, whether it's by email or uploaded where, and what the deadline for submitting it will be. And of course, you can give rewards. You can show a 5-star sign in the camera for a specific group or learner. You can unmute students and clap hands all together, cheering or singing something, and so on. And then after the lesson, of course, the interaction will be similar to the one before the lesson. It will be about posting a task somewhere in the LMS, or you email it. Students might do it individually or work together on a collaborative document. The work could be text-based, for example, practicing simple past, or you might want them to create something such as a text or an audio-video project, and so on. Okay, and other options after the lesson might be to ask them to share comments and feedback again, as they did before, to giving feedback to their colleagues, to their peers' work, and at the end you provide your feedbacks, again choosing the visibility level that is appropriate. Now, coming to feedback to writing, how can we provide feedback when teaching remotely? Some tips that hopefully will make feedback a bit more time effective for you, and at the same time more collaborative than usually in the real classroom. You might want to just give feedback in the form of general comments on criteria, and using color coding to highlight different examples or different types of errors or problems. And you can also use several options to leave feedback. You can use the review function in Microsoft Word to insert comment, to track the changes. And there is very useful training on how to provide feedback using Word, Google Documents, or automated markers, again, on the Digital Teacher platform. So here's an example of a way to give feedback, as I said, mentioning the positive aspect, but only a general type of feedback referring to categories, to aspects. Few mistakes, nice language, could link sentences better, but it's not a very detailed feedback highlighting every single error. Another option would be to, as I said, use color coding. And you can see there are two types of mistakes highlighted. For example, the yellow one has to do with grammar, and the blue ones have to do with vocabulary. And you also notice that I inserted comments from Microsoft Word. You can see that several people can provide feedback on the same document, and that will be captured because you can see who left each comment. And this is very easily done in the review menu of Microsoft Word. You can insert new comment and then choosing to track changes so that it becomes easier to see, or more transparent, how the text is being improved. Other types of feedback to students' work could be in an oral form. You record your screen using a screencasting tool while you're reading their text, and while reading, you're providing comments. And this is particularly suitable if your students are in the upper secondary, of course, or above. And it feels as if you're explaining to the students directly what they need to improve. Another option would be to capture screenshots of your students' work, and on the screenshot you can annotate, you can draw boxes, you can make comments, and so on. And then you can email this annotated picture to your students. You can also design peer feedback. For example, you give, as a teacher, more holistic feedback, as you saw an example the slides before, but you ask students to find in the text detailed examples of the problem that you highlighted. For example, if your overall comments on aspects such as organization, and then the peer feedback will focus on examples of where organization could be improved. And yet another way, if you don't need to grade all the students, you may want to ask two students to swap writing and provide comments to each other. And then you can examine only one text submitted by only one of the students. You will see that student's text, but you will also get an insight into the second student's understanding of writing conventions by just looking at the feedback they left. So in this way, you're saving time. You don't have to grade the second student, but you also get some information about how the student understood the task and what the quality of their feedback was. Okay, right. Coming to the end, it's important overall to be prepared to need more time than in the real classroom, because activities to be set up, checks to be done, the technological checks to be done, collecting answers, giving feedback take more time than in face-to-face situations. And it's also, as I said at the beginning, maybe better to go for shorter sessions with smaller groups. And for this reason, to plan maybe fewer activities and steps. Also, maybe you can focus more on term-based project work, which is easier to set now. For example, having them create a poster or a blog or a school magazine. But most important of all, don't try to do everything that I have shown you in this webinar at once. This is just an overview of what is possible, but it's always a good idea to start and do things step by step, one by one. And of course, remember that the controversial statement that I showed at the beginning, teaching online is only a matter of passing on information. We don't want it to be true, but it becomes true if we forget the learner experience. Teaching was never just about providing information. if we forget the learner experience, we won't be flipping the classroom, we will simply be giving it up. Further resources, I mentioned the digitalteacher.com, the platform we have for teachers embarking on teaching digital. It's fully free, and you can find lots of training, you learning how to, for example, provide feedback, how to use specific digital tools, but also lesson plans that you can use with your students on the digitalteacher.com. The digitalteacher.com. I'm going to share this with all of you so you can copy it more easily. And the last big resource is Supporting Every Teacher, our page on our website, which is designed as a hub centralizing all the resources you might need. For example, free teaching resources now also include lessons that can be used online. The example lesson, What Makes You Laugh, Write an Article, is taken from there. You can use the Cambridge University's Press Supporting Every Teacher blog, which is full of posts on how to teach online with good pedagogically or sound pedagogical foundations. You can watch our free webinars or recordings from the past, of course, and also see what other webinars are coming up. This is the way you can find the online resources on our website. So there's a menu where you can select the level and then lesson plan. And yes, I'm aware that we are running late, but I'm going to have a look at the questions now. So how can I share a page to all breakout rooms when open? So there is the option. I cannot really show it to you, but you can choose to share something that is only to the main room, or to share it to all the breakout rooms. So this is a clear option. How could we match the activities? So I'm going to click that. Done. How could we match the activities with students' learning styles? Well, yes, this is why learning has to be done together with a teacher, because the teacher needs to, of course, you know your students best, and you will, just as you decide in the real classroom, you would make the same choices. What is changed is that balance between what you do face to face and what you do as individual work. And of course, the other difference is the technicalities of how you communicate using the devices and the platforms and so on. But otherwise, how you select your activities will be a very important decision that you will need to make. For countries with slow internet connection, how possible is it to use online education? How can we assure the quality of education? Okay, so probably the lightest options, for example, using email, using the lightest chat or instant messaging tool that is available. For example, you might use Skype. I don't know if Skype is stable enough, or Google Hangouts. So getting back a bit to the basics, to the priorities. What is important? Do I need to use Zoom with all the functionalities of having video and all that, or can I simply use a Google document, for example, which is just a matter of accessing a URL? You don't need very good internet connection to do that. So from all the choices that you heard in this webinar and that you find in all the similar materials on the internet, just choose the lightest tools, but it's still possible to do. It doesn't have to be very fancy. How can we make online tests more reliable? I tried some platforms designed for testing such as quizzes and Kahoot. However, I cannot make sure that whether students are cheating or not. They may use other apps to discuss with each other. Yes, this issue of cheating and reliability from this point of view, that's partly answered by what I said at the beginning about trust. We have to accept that what we call cheating is a fact. Maybe we need to distance ourselves a bit from the idea of cheating. Maybe we simply need to engage the students and make the tests fun for them as well, or meaningful for them to understand. I want to see my own level. I want to see what I have learned. And maybe they will realize that there's no way, there's no point in cheating. So that's a tricky one that requires a bit of rethink again, a different way of approaching this relation of the learners to what we are teaching them. Sorry. Okay, the presentation will be recorded. Yes. Will face showing in class improve the interaction? If yes, how can I encourage my students to show their face, since most of them don't like the idea? Well, it's best not to force anything. If you force them to show their face and they don't want to, then it won't improve the interaction. So simply go with whatever is more comfortable with everyone. Some of them may want to turn on their cameras, others may not. It's perfectly fine. This is also what happens institutionally, internally in our teams when we have our virtual meetings. Some of us are comfortable turning on the cameras. Others are thinking, well, maybe there are people moving in the background. I don't want them to be projected in the virtual lesson. So then I prefer not to use the camera. So it's fine as long as people are comfortable. This is what creates the best interaction possible. Okay, and one last question. How can we increase the interaction time between teachers and students? Well, exactly what I've been trying to show in this webinar, trying to focus only the purely interactive, or to select for your lesson only the purely interactive elements of your lesson, and to delegate or to leave every other activity like reading a text or watching a video for input before the lesson. So this is the way to maximize, and when you are together with the student, you don't have to talk a lot like I have been doing for the past hour or so, because they will have read the content before that, and during the lesson you just discuss with them using, as I said, chat, using the whiteboard function or a Google document, and monitoring what's happening there, using polls like I have been using during the webinar, using audio and video, and so on. Okay, I think there are no other questions at the moment. Thank you very much for cooperating. And yes, I'm wishing you all the best. Stay healthy, and also enjoy teaching online.
VUS, your English, your future.